slide theme. Should I go back, Alex? All right. Continuing on. I'm expressing welcome everyone to our fourth Truth and Labeling Task Force meeting, and I would like to thank DEQ for their incredible assistance in helping drive us forward, and to herd cats, which I will at least say that I am a cat that needs a herding. So I'm grateful for the support that Alex and team at DEQ are able to provide. Thank you so much. We would not be able to do this without you. And thank you to all of the task force members, which even more meaningful, it's in statute that we can't do it without you, and we can't do it without you. And we're grateful for the homework that you did in between meetings and the feedback that you responded. A quick update, we will have our public comment time. It is held at the end of the meeting for 10 minutes. So we'll have time for 5 comments if held to 2 minutes each. So as always, please message Alex via the Zoom app. You should have a drop down that can message him, and you can either say that you want to do it orally or in writing, and then he would read it out to us. But again, if you do want to have a public comment, message Alex to put yourself in that queue. And I will make an announcement, or I'll try to remember to make an announcement midway through this meeting again to make sure that we're able to capture that public comment. Okay, so with that, I think that's all I had for public comment. Anything else for you, Alex? You're off mute, so you can chime in.
No, nothing for me. I think that'll do it.
Perfect. All right. Okay. So I wanted to share, we were struggling to try to synthesize all of the various proposals that came, and the vice chair and I were. And so what we ended up doing is breaking them into component parts with help from DEQ at our direction. And then we shared that out in the form of a survey. So we were asking for task force members to say whether they support, neutral, or opposed each element. And we were really clear that the caveat to that just because if you support an element or opposed an element, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is how you will be aligned for that final proposal. But we wanted to be able to capture directionally how people feel about the various components of the proposals that were put forward. And when I say proposals, some were much more formal than others. There was a continuum there. You know, we are, the idea being that then the chair, or myself and the vice chair, were able to take that feedback and synthesize that and hone that into some straw person proposals. And the idea behind any straw person proposal is that we can beat it up. There's no pride in ownership. We can shape it to how we want it to look like as a task force, but this will help direct our thinking. And I will say that it was actually a pretty valuable exercise in terms of planning for this meeting, because it really kind of helped highlight where there was overwhelming consensus and where there really was fairly wan support. Vice Chair Brandon, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I would add that, you know, just echo everything that our chair said, and add that it really helped us think, you know, kind of get a pulse check of this task force to see how we can start building those Lego pieces together into something that can hopefully take shape as a more comprehensive straw proposals. And we're going to walk through the data here in a minute. And you also, all of our task force members should have just received the data from Alex. So thank you again, Alex, for sharing that out. And Dylan and I used this data to pull these pieces together, and we used the data that you all see. So we used the summarized data to put this all together, really trying to focus on where there's alignment rather than where there's disagreement. Yeah, I think with that, we can probably start walking through.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anya. Okay, so the first thing we did is we broke this into, and we'll show some more raw data kind of coming up, but we just highlighting the numbers of the amount of support that we had. There were 3 items that had, overwhelming support, although the next 2 slides get into supported by more than half the votes, which was a majority of the bullets or the components, that the Lego pieces that we're digging into. So the first is supporting labeling improvements at the federal level. Also to provide time for packaging producers to prepare for any changes adopted, and to provide an on-ramp for new materials or materials that have developing markets. So you'll see reflected in our straw person proposals is that this is sort of integrated into each of them, or can be integrated into each of them, again, as we go forward. Then the next 2 also had strong support, and you'll see that really kind of formed the basis of the initial strong person, which is that we would require clear, standardized recycling labels, meaning chasing arrows or instruction for separating items as needed, that are on Oregon's uniform statewide collection list. So again, all of these proposals are predicated on a future state following implementation, in particular of the uniform statewide collection list. And then the sort of surprise one that came out of the last meeting, which is that mandate embedded recyclability labeling via QR code or other smart labeling technology. And again, we'll get into exactly how these votes break down in a couple of slides, but we wanted to share these as kind of blocked into these voting pieces. So the second block is with 9 supporters, is that you would require the RIC without any triangle or chasing arrows shape, and that PROs, the producer responsibility organizations, be required to run statewide ad campaigns to teach Oregonians about label changes that part of the PRO plan. Oop, and I did not cut I was coloring it red. We did some color coding. You see a little bit behind the scenes here. Then the next piece is requiring DEQ to review state criteria against enforceable federal statute, as well as the use of the PRO as a tool for removing non-compliant products from sale in Oregon. And then lastly, of the supporting pieces, to allow the 45 degrees line through the recycling symbols, which again, you'll see reflected in that proposal. And then lastly, packaging not on the Oregon's uniform statewide collection list, not allowed to have arrows or recyclability claims. And so I'll now share really quick just how those votes broke down. And you can see that the horizontal lines are opposed. The kind of, well, I'm colorblind, so the middle one is neutral, and then the dotted color on the right is support. And I'll just pause and let you read through these, and also give opportunity for task force if you have any questions about these pieces, and then we'll go to the next one. And here you see this is where we ordered them in the order of support, but these were ordered in the way the survey went out to task force members. So you can see here in the middle, we had the greatest amount of support there. So after the supported by more than half the votes, we got into our split votes. And so these are that really there was an even or close to even amount of opposition, neutrality, and in support of. And here we have the mandating the PRO to lobby nationally against the RIC, national and in the 36 states that currently have RIC requirements. We also have the removal of the RIC through eco-modulation via the PRO, mandating the do not recycle label for not on the Oregon or California list. And then there is a pairing of that with another survey, which you'll see on the next slide, of a threshold for the do not. So meaning that there would be an on-ramp to that do not for materials that are close to be able to help support them to do investments to get to the do recycle list. Then there is the status quo, which we'll get into in a moment, and then prohibit recyclability claims unless there is a national third-party standard. So looking at the split votes, you can see here a varying, kind of splitting of those pieces. Not everyone answered every question, but you can kind of see here how it broke down. And I'll pause again, see if there's any questions, and then we'll look at the two that were opposed by more than half the votes. Okay, so the two that were opposed by more than half the votes were to prohibit recyclability labeling on covered packaging unless it's required by another state or agency or federal law, and to focus labeling efforts first on plastics packaging. So those were rejected outright. But you'll see in the proposals that we'll go through here, the straw person proposals, that we tried to integrate those pieces that were supported by more than half the votes into these straw person proposals, and again, open to discussion and potentially even to open back up for voting to be able to dig into what those pieces are. And then our hope is that, well, not our hope, the bulk of this time that we'll be spending together will be digging in on this and debating and having conversations about it. So with that, we'll get into the proposals. So this is our proposal number one, which would be recommendations for legislature. And you'll see we actually have two slides on this. We have a proposal and then potential add-ons. So we kind of broke up these into Lego pieces, as we said, and we kind of put them together and made a little house, or a little recycling symbol, I guess, a circle. So this would require clear standardized recycling labels. Again, you see that piece into it. And then married with that on non-recyclable arrows, you would allow use of the chasing arrows symbol only with that 45-degree strike through for non-recyclable labels. That would be paired and potentially as a compliance engine to mandate embedded recyclability labeling via the QR code or other smart labeling technology. And again, as you can see there, that no matter what requirements are put in there, that there would be ample time for packaging producers to prepare for any changes be adopted. There was, during one of our planning meetings, it was raised that there was a report recently that said a 36-month timeline it could be a potential reasonable timeline that would then not lead to increased costs on producers. I will say that we did not dig in to that report, so I don't mean to state that as truth, but just to highlight that. And Sean, I see your hand is raised, so chime in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, did you send us these proposals, or did Alex send it? I got the results, but I didn't see the proposals.
No, this is the proposals are being presented to you now for us to discuss. So we have been working diligently on them and literally finalized these slides 30 minutes ago. So this is brand new of us taking the information, getting the survey results, honing them, developing these slides together.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, happy to share these out after the meeting, or if we have a lot of comment and feedback, we can share out version 1.1 of our
that'd be great.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other piece, and again captured from that, supported by more than half, is that there would be an on-ramp to labeling for new materials that are supported by ENDS markets. So again, that was one of the pieces that had a majority of support. And then add-ons, you would have establishing a threshold for requiring a do not recycle label. So with chasing arrows with a strike through. So that would be pieces that are not on Oregon's uniform statewide list and not considered recyclable. So both of those. And then you could have a threshold, set it below, say, a 30 to 50% recycling acceptance rate. And then another piece could be that you could require the RIC without any triangle or chasing arrow symbols. So these are some Lego pieces that we put together, again, culled from those other pieces to be able to dig in. Maybe I'll do the recommendations to the Pro and then what we call the future status quo plus, and then we can go back and start digging in on these. But again, if there's any questions as we're going through, please raise them.
I have a question, Alec,
Yeah.
or Dylan. Sorry, I can't find my raise hand thing.
It's okay. I see you. I recognize Kristen Mitchell. Go ahead.
Thank you. So on this one, establish a threshold for requiring do not recycle labeling. Isn't that number 6 from the list? And didn't that have 5 in opposition to that, and then 4 supporting and 4 neutral?
Yes. So, sorry, we leaned on the supported by. We added this in as a potential Lego because this was not a. We could add in any other Lego pieces from the split votes. I would, say we probably shouldn't add Legos to oppose to more than half the votes, but this was this seems to be part and parcel with the other proposal of mandating embedded recyclability claims, and so those 2 pieces seem to be of a piece. So that's why we included this Lego.
Yeah. It is one that had more opposition than more in favor, and we can talk more about it in more detail. I'll let you keep going.
So absolutely, yeah. And again, these are straw persons. These are not final anything. So yeah, absolutely, we can trim that off if we decide. Go ahead.
Part of our thinking was also, pulling out some potential add-ons just to show that these could be made add-ons, right? We could think of other pieces to add on as well, but also just to think about what other of those Lego blocks could potentially be compatible. If we're focusing in on this proposal 1, what are these other pieces that had split support or other support could logically fit into that proposal?
Terrific. Okay, so we sorted this. So this would be a potential recommendation to legislature, right? So that would be one of the proposals. The second proposal would be recommendations to the producer responsibility organization. And so this was capturing the pieces that had support that were under the PRO piece. So the recommendation that the Pro would run statewide ad campaigns to teach Oregonians about label changes. This could be embedded in the already mandated in statute education requirements in the Recycling Modernization Act, but it could also be an additional recommendation. And then a recommendation to use eco-modulation to support recycling labeling best practices, perhaps even based on bonus fees for eco-modulation. This is something that is actually embedded in other EPR systems globally, France and UK to name a couple, I believe actually Germany as well. So again, these are grabbing things that would be recommendations to the Pro, and this could be combined with the other or be a standalone. Kristen, go ahead.
Hey, Alex, sorry, I keep calling you Alex.
I'm Dylan, but Alex and I both are follically challenged, so I'm with you.
Which is just great. So I was just going to point out that the on-ramp language in the first part is also already an existing law through Senate Bill 582 through the USCL process and the ORSAC process, and that is what we would support as well. So I think that could be called out as something that's already in existence, and then maybe something we can trim off that list. Thanks.
Terrific. Thank you for highlighting that, Kristen. We thought we knew that, but we thought by including it, it would just kind of allay worries that we weren't including that, even though you're right, it is in law. So the last would be a future status quo plus, which is what we were calling it for. So again, I feel like the term status quo can be used a bit of as a pejorative term, and really this is not a true status quo being today, but rather the future status quo of following the implementation of 2 pretty far-reaching laws. So the Recycling Modernization Act in California's SB 343. So allowing both of those to be fully implemented, and then, which would require changes to, I'll wave to you next time, Nicole, to allow them to both be fully implemented, which will of course require changes to labeling on pack labeling, for a broad array of packages. And I will pause before I get into the others. And Senator Beyer, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a question. When we say coordinate with, I understand Cal Recycle, but why don't we add Washington into that, whatever their equivalent is, trying to promote a West Coast wide system?
That's a great suggestion, Senator Beyer. Ours were that we were under statute coordinating. So that's we were trying to connect the 343 with RMA, but that's a great add-on. And the idea there, to Senator Beyer's point, would be coordinating around those accepted materials lists. So that way, if there are some materials that are close, we've used that Venn diagram in the past to kind of highlight potential pieces that are close, that we could suggest that there is coordination between DEQ and Cal Recycle, or Department of Ecology in Washington as well. Excellent suggestion, Senator Beyer. And then the other suggestion of coordination is that there would be a suggestion of coordination from DEQ and the future PRO that will be set up here in Oregon around the investments needed for those materials that are close to making statewide accepted materials lists. So there would be a request from this task force to DEQ that if there is a material, and I think we highlighted them as PET thermoforms as one of the pieces that potentially would not be on the statewide accepted material list here, but would be able to meet the threshold that California's SB 343 outlines, that there would be a coordination with the PRO to suggest around investments to be able to make that material sortable in Oregon, or to support end markets for that material in Oregon. So that way it gives it extra time to be able to make those statewide accepted materials lists. And there is a highlight from Alex that says, by the way, Washington's Department of Ecology is participating in DEQ's technical work group, so their TAC, for their statewide material list. So there is at least some participation, and we could suggest even further coordination along those lines. Thank you for adding that, Alex. And Dave, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess a clarifying question about this potential investment. My concern is about how that would work. We have multiple MRFs now. We'd obviously like to keep the playing field level for them. So an investment in one MRF that allowed them to take additional materials could hurt the viability of MRFs that weren't presented with that same investment, and I'm just concerned or confused about what that might look like. If you could help me out with that.
For sure. So this would be a suggestion, and perhaps there could have been a couple extra words included here, of coordination between Oregon DEQ and the future PRO as part of the PRO plan. So the PRO plan, which will have input from the ORSAC, which has representation of the state's MRFs, that would be able to make the suggestions or recommended amendments to that PRO plan for what those investments may be. And you could conceivably see that feedback saying that an investment in one MRF should be made in all MRFs, or perhaps there should be no investments and the investment should be in end markets. Those, again, I'm hypothesizing about a PRO plan that has yet to even be conceived of, rather than it being drafted. But the idea being that there would be a recommendation to have that be included in that PRO plan, which would then be vetted through the vetting process as outlined in SB 582, which would again have to be required to go through the ORSAC process and approved by DEQ. Did that answer that question for you, Dave? And then I'm going to go to Kristen.
I think so, yes.
Kristen, go ahead.
Thanks for highlighting the points on going through the ORSAC and the Uniform Statewide Collection List, because I think in Oregon, that's the key. We're going to be following what Oregon law requires, and that means we're already going to have this discussion about what the appropriate materials are for Oregon's program. And I always think it's right and good and helpful to coordinate as we can up and down the West Coast in particular. I think that that's an important conversation to have, but I also would not want to be stymied by efforts that are or are not occurring in our neighboring states, and also maybe things that just don't fit in Oregon. For example, if we followed the California and Washington model, we'd have glass in our commingled carts. That's the way things work in those states. That's not the way things work in Oregon. And I think our fiber markets are very appreciative of that fact. So I think it's okay for us to continue to follow a path that does not necessarily line up all the time to the West Coast. Yes, let's have the conversations, but no, let's not delay our efforts on waiting on others. Thanks.
Absolutely. And to be clear, there would be a suggestion. So this proposal would be potentially, it would be a suggestion to DEQ, not a mandate to DEQ, other than what has already been outlined in statute to underline our response to Dave and also Kristen's points. Okay, so we put the overview of the proposals on a single slide so we can do some comparisons to it. I'm in control of the slides here, so I can bounce back and forth to either the raw data or the individual proposal pieces. I also have the Venn diagram as an example to be able to walk through to sort of highlight what these proposals would be. But really what we're hoping to do now is to have conversation about this. So, if you want to raise your hand or just unmute yourself to chime in, we're wanting to get your thoughts and feedback and your own proposals to say, hey, maybe this is something that we shouldn't have as part of it, or you should include this. Again, these are meant to be straw person proposals. We do not have a drafted report ready to go. This is the amount of text that we've prepared. So would love people's thoughts and feedback. Go ahead, Kristen.
I would
Kristen
just say
and then Dan.
Before we move on to comments, sorry, Dylan, I didn't raise my hand. That these can coexist, right? We can have recommendations to our PRO and recommendations to the legislature. Like these things can happen in parallel. Obviously, proposal 1, proposal 3 are stand in contrast to each other. But we can think about different kind of lanes in which we can offer up recommendations as a task force.
Yeah, and to be clear, one of the ones that had overwhelming support that we struggled to weave into the proposals is support for federal labeling. Just in terms of, other than maybe a statement of support for federal labeling, we struggled to see how that could fit into these proposals. But I would just highlight that is missing from these, and that did have a super majority of support, almost unanimous support among task force members. Kristen, go ahead.
So I guess my struggle is the speed with which we are moving to proposals that were just presented in this meeting, combined with the fact that we just saw the summarized data from the surveys about 20 minutes before this meeting started. I would have thought it would make more sense to have conversations about the survey responses than to move. And I appreciate the work you're doing. I understand the difficulty of it, but then to have the chair and the vice chair turn those into proposals that then we have to kind of dig back through and say, well, what about this piece and what about this piece? I mean, honestly, I think there should be more conversation about the ones that were close. For example, I feel like I know it didn't make the list because there were 7 opposed, 5 in favor, and 1 in neutral of focusing first on plastics, but I'd like to have more conversation about that because I think it's helpful in the conversation. The reason that we suggested we focus on plastics first is plastics that are the reason that we are here. We are not here because of cardboard, paper, glass, which doesn't go in the commingled cart, but we're not here for the traditional materials. We're here for the materials that are making it difficult for us to deliver clean materials to MRFs and access markets, and that's about plastics. So we have limited time in this conversation. I'm not suggesting that plastics is the only thing we discuss. I am suggesting that it would make more sense for us to focus, because of our limited time, on the issue that is the one that's most concerning. So if we can't have broader conversations about those survey points, or we should, I think we should be having those conversations before we go through the proposals that have already been built off of things we've only really looked at very briefly. And that's my view of this entire timeline. I get that it's hard to do, but I think it makes more sense for us to go through the survey points, talk about those, and give people another chance maybe to then fill out that survey again, this time with attributes to who said what in that survey and provide that information out to people so we have a broader conversation about how we're going to build our new recycling shack or our new Lego house. So that's my issue with going straight to proposals.
Thank you for that feedback, Kristen. And to your point on speed, that is why we did this in the way that we did this. So we were able to compile and share this out. We are not suggesting that we no longer speak about the survey results. In fact, I stated, and I will state again, that we wish to have feedback on each of them. I don't think we have to debate each of them individually, in toto, but if there's something that you want to raise, then by all means raise. And you raised your support for the one of the components that was opposed by more than half the votes, which is to focus on plastics first, and you made a case there, and now we can respond as a group. So appreciate the feedback, and we will dig in now. So Dan, go ahead, and then Nicole.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. And I do appreciate Kristen's remarks. I'm probably having spam email issues because I haven't even received the survey results yet. So trying to, I appreciate that we'll have some additional time, even if it's offline from this group, to be able to dig in further. And then I hope we can bring back questions, or to Kristen's point, if there's things that were sort of on the margins, we'll do that. That being said, I understand the timeline is tight. And so I had a question or a thought, wanted to dig a little deeper on proposal number 1 regarding the embedded recyclability via QR code or something. And this is the concept around having a mandate, right? And that's an issue. That's a concept I'd have to take back to my members and sort of see where they're at. Having 25, 26 brand owners, plus some other packaging manufacturers who would be a producer as well in certain instances. I'm wondering about where this fits in. Twofold, really, is we have had some conversations at Ameripen about this perhaps being a function of eco-modulation rather than being a mandate. And because you have that proposal over there in number 2, or that bullet about eco-modulation features, I'd welcome a conversation with this group about whether or not it might be more appropriate to have something like QR codes or other technology as part of eco-modulation. But let me back up there and let's just make the presumption that it stays over in proposal number 1. That would not be Ameripen's choice. But I guess I'm wondering about recyclability from whose perspective. So if you're using a QR code, it's so a consumer, I'm assuming or presuming it's for a consumer to be able to scan the QR code, understand if that's recyclable or not. However, there are also technologies that are being considered, and I'll refer to some digital marking that's gaining some traction over in Europe, where it also is a technology to assist the recyclers, right? And I guess I'm sort of wondering, if we start those technologies, and I'm talking about Holy Grail over in Europe, which has not had as much traction here, where does that fit into this conversation, or does it fit into this conversation?
Absolutely. And so I would say that it actually fits it. I mean, again, the overview is necessarily, shortened from these slides, which are shortened from the larger pieces. But that if they're, in terms of recyclability determination, it would be the Oregon's statewide uniform statewide collection list, and the determination that DEQ went over in the first meeting, or the second meeting rather, in terms of how they do that determination. And in terms of the Holy Grail, or Holy Grail 2.0, which is just for those who maybe don't know about that, that would be embedded into a label but not visible to the naked eye. It would be it's a way to scan, and actually doesn't even need to be in a label. It can be in the actual the package itself. That can be scanned either by a smartphone technology if you have the right app, or as Dan pointed out, by sortation technology embedded in the MRF. And so that is what that other smart labeling technology line would be. So the QR code was just a shorthand for that, or other like-minded technology. Dan.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess then I would say, so for instance, if it's not a QR code and someone wants to look at another technology which isn't readily available, used predominantly here in the United States is how do you find that balance between something being mandated versus trying to get there at some point and have that technology, whether it's for the consumer's ability to understand recyclability or for the sortation process. And if it, again, I'm going to go back to, is there a better balance there if it's a feature potentially of echo modulation to give those who use that technology some credit, some bonus, if you will, within the PRO program, rather than it being a mandate that they have to do some type of technology.
Right. So that would be a recycling labeling best practice, for instance, in this.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks.
All right, Nicole, then Senator Byer. Oh, we've got a list. So I'll just go in order as I've seen them come in. So Nicole, go ahead.
Thank you, Dylan. The only two things I was going to bring up was I'm definitely a visual person, and looking at these overview of proposals, I see pieces of all of them within a timeline over the next, few years that we are trying to implement. So I'm hoping at some point, because I feel kind of the left foot and the right foot have to be able to walk together. So when you're talking about some of Oregon and California having alignment, yes, and then we need more time for any of our brand companies to be able to have the new QR codes or labeling, whatever we'd like to do in the future. So I feel like I understand we have it broken apart because we have legislation, the pros, but at some point I'd love to see how maybe some of this could work together in a timeline. And the second piece, kind of going along with getting all this information just today, I'd like to know if we are going to have speakers discussing potentially the new labeling we're discussing with QR codes or European proposal like was just brought up. Just because we are moving so fast, we need a little background to help educate everyone on the same level.
Thank you, Nicole. So that's a good suggestion in terms of putting things in timelines, and we can definitely deliver that. So I appreciate that suggestion. And in terms of the research, we did share out that research compiled, that DEQ did in response to the request for information that we shared out with the group in that Word document. We have not highlighted our time in these individual meetings to be able to deliver that. But if there is a consensus among everyone that we have to hold time for that, we could potentially have a side meeting to be able to share out some of that research that you highlighted, Nicole. But the aggressive timeline that we are mandated to be under is required us to focus on honing text in parallel to be able to consider some of that research. So again, I guess I would call that to the group to see if there's a majority of support for that.
Okay.
Do you want to do that now? Like I would vote for more information.
Who is that?
Sorry, it's me, Dave Larmouth.
Oh, hey, Dave. Sorry, it's hard to see everybody. Sure. So before we get to the next comment, which is Senator Byer, let's take a quick vote. So this would be a call to do a separate meeting to be able to share out research information that we would have to agree to what that research would be in parallel to working on these proposals sometime in the next couple of weeks. So
should we have Alex tally the votes in the chat?
That would be a great idea. Thank you, Anya. So we'll take a moment. So we're voting among just task force members.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Who is that?
Is this in addition to the regularly scheduled meetings we have going forward right now?
It would be in addition to the regularly scheduled meetings. So we could potentially add on to it, but the idea would be that it would be in addition to that. We don't believe there's time to give these presentations in the regularly scheduled meetings and also get to the finalization of the report. So the vote is for adding a separate meeting to be able to have folks present to us on some of the technology that we're discussing, the future recycling labeling technology in a short time frame, perhaps next week, to be able to have that available, to record that perhaps, and share out with task force members so they can consider that as we are honing these proposals. And please put that in the chat, and Alex will tally that chat.
While we're waiting for that report out. Do we want to move to Senator Byer?
Yes. Senator Byer, go ahead.
Thank you, Dylan. I just wanted to follow up on Kristen's comments, and I like the general direction of the proposal, but I too agree that it makes sense to focus on plastics as a sort of the first major push. I will say that when we discussed Senate Bill 582, the original push for 582 was addressed solely at plastics, and we expanded that obviously. But I think the major problem, as Kristen said, is really at this point is plastics.
So I'll share this. I'll share this data out that we did not have a majority support for the focused labeling plastics first on plastic packaging. So that was our first rationale to not have as part of the proposal. I would suggest, and I would actually call on Dan, and Dan, your hand is still raised, so I don't believe you still mean to be, or other experts on the task force that we have, that compliance on just plastic packaging could be challenging for brand owners to comply in terms of labeling. Given that, how would that be defined? Would that be on plastics only packaging or potentially other pieces as well? So, but that said, we can certainly consider it as a group. And obviously you and Kristen have highlighted how you voted on this in terms of support, and we can come back to this. So, and I'm going to put Alex to the top of the line because I believe he maybe has a comment for the process. Go ahead, Alex.
I just wanted to let you know that the majority of folks, it looks like 10 voted yes to have that additional meeting. Many folks aren't sure if they're going to be able to make it, but would like to see a recording or notes from that.
Terrific. Alex, we'll hold on at the end of the meeting to be able to work to schedule that that extra meeting, and thank you for suggestion and support for that. Senator Byer, do you have a follow-up question? No, okay. Then Tom, go ahead.
Thanks, Dylan. I guess this is another area where I don't feel I have information, and I don't know if Dan and I think Jenny are here representing the producers. I'm just trying to understand what an Oregon, unique to Oregon label means for recyclability. Like, is that, if that's something that producers can do, then there's no reason we shouldn't do it. If it's not something they can do, I would like to understand why and how that shows up in the national or global marketplace, because it just seems to me we're a small state in the United States, and it's a global marketplace, and I just don't understand how that works, or if it works, and if it's not possible, or if all the producers will come out and opposing it and spend millions of dollars to fight it in the legislature. It just doesn't seem like something that we should put out. I think this group is supposed to come together to find something that is more feasible for everybody. So I just don't understand. I don't know the answer to that. And so maybe if Dan and Jenny, if you have input on that, it would be good to have.
So Tom, I'm going to hop Dan and Jenny to the top of the list just to be able to, so Sean and Maya, thank you for your patience. Dan, do you want to answer that first, and then we'll move on to Jenny, and then I can chime in at the end.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. And it just quite frankly isn't feasible to start having state-specific standards. And when we're operating, the producers, the brand owners are operating in a, I don't want to say a global market, but I want to say a national market anyway. And in some instances, you could say global if the products are going up to Canada, for example. But it's just not practical to be developing state-specific requirements, whether that's a Oregon-specific do not recycle label. I'm interested in talking at some point with the group about the RIC, the add-on number 2 there, but it just doesn't work that way. And I know we had a little discussion in the last task force about, well, there are, the bottle bill state-specific requirements. That's different though, because that is multiple states that have bottle bills as an example. And generally, when you look on a state-specific labeling under a bottle bill, you're going to see all generally speaking, all 10 states listed there for what other requirements. So it's still a regionally or nationally distributed product versus looking to have a product specific to Oregon, which is, again, go back to the reminder that it's going to be in contrast, or in contrast isn't necessarily the right word, but in competition isn't the right word, but at odds with what's required in a whole host of other states, I guess is the best way to say it. So Dylan, I'll stop there. I'm happy to come back to that plastics specific focus if you want to come back to me at some point, because I have a comment about that as well.
Why don't you keep your hand raised, Dan, and we'll get you in order for that. Jenny, do you want to respond to Tom?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Dan just said. Like, that's right on. I think where people get confused is you see custom print all the time, right? You go to a Blazers game and you get a cup that says Portland Trail Blazers on it, and that was made by somebody to meet that demand. But I can't reiterate enough how expensive that is. And that right now in the United States, there are very few places to even do that. And so the wait through the supply chain to get any sort of like custom labeling on anything is crazy. And that just adds to the cost and the difficulty of doing that. So that definitely is something to keep in mind. I mean, again, like we don't make plastic products, but we do make products. And so I can speak to that. It would definitely create challenges and would definitely bump up the costs. Yeah, I do have questions about the resin codes too, if they're Oregon specific as opposed to going along with what California is doing. Like we are working so hard and spending so much time to comply with all the different laws in California that it's almost like mind-boggling to think about having separate ones in Oregon and separate ones in Washington and trying to keep track of all of that. It takes a lot of time and a lot of manpower to make sure that you're doing everything correctly and labeling everything correctly. And again, like that, it's not always feasible. Yeah. So I just agree with everything that Dan said.
Thank you. I was going to do the same. Cost and complexity is incredibly challenging for a state-specific piece. Okay, so next up we have Sean and then Maya.
No, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I want to just echo what Jenny just said and Dan as well, that it's just not practical to have a state-specific list and requirements. Tying into these three proposals, looking at proposal number one, because instead of a mandate on the QR, why not just an alternative to what's required in the label? So, again, allow it, but make it an alternative is what I'd rather propose than a mandate. And so you have the label, and then you use the QR as an alternative. And then I guess that ties into number three, proposal number three, when you look at the suggestion of coordination of DEQ and CalRecycle. I like Senator Byer's suggestion of having Washington, because, we would like to align this as best we can, if not federally, regionally, with California and the state of Washington. But looking at, and I like in number three where it talks about Senate Bill 343 to be implemented. One of the issues I had, or problems I had dealing with question 12 in the survey, is it talked about, even though I know it had some, more support, talks about creates uniform statewide collection after dialogue with California. I struggled with after dialogue and what that really meant. I guess I viewed that as really after implementation of Senate Bill 343, and I think that's tied into number three. But I was concerned with just the word dialogue, just as trying to take the survey, now putting it into the proposals. But I've seen that you've at least tied number three into kind of implementation of that. And so I just didn't know if you wanted to comment on that, Mr. Chair. But again, I struggled with that after dialogue and what that meant, but I assume now in the proposal it means after implementation.
Yes. So I think that it was the specific language, I think, was challenged a bit about implementation of the Recycling Modernization Act. And so that was why we amended that language to be reflected in the proposal that we put forward, you know, as part of that. So, and I agree, some of the wording could have been slightly different, you know, and maybe would have been more clarifying. And perhaps that could be follow-up information that we're able to gather. So thank you for that.
Yep, thank you.
All right, Maya and then Dan.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to comment on the plastics first conversation, because I think that everything that people have said in terms of the prevalence of plastic as contamination is true, and we do have to focus on plastics in a sense. But I would say that there are many pieces of the conversation that just are not singled out to any particular material. Most of the things we discuss could be, you know, across the board, applied to all materials, and it would probably, I think, speed up the overall process just to consider that you know, paper, aluminum, whatever, that these labels would apply to all of them. And really the piece of the conversation, which I do think we're focusing on in large part, is the resin code. So that is unique for the plastic materials. But I think we can manage to sort of have those conversations in parallel. And I think it would behoove us to consider all the materials.
Thank you, Maya. Dan, go ahead, and then Anya.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan. And I would echo Maya's comments. Earlier, it popped into my head as that conversation started about when you say plastics or is focus on plastics, and question we had to come up even in California last year is, what does that mean? What does it mean if you're just going to be focused on plastics? And from a packaging perspective, that can be quite challenging in terms of plastics that are or other materials that are coated with plastics, or plastics and paper that are bonded together. It becomes very difficult very quickly. And I just think it makes more sense to be focused on all materials. Plastics will be a big focus of it, of course, but it won't be the only thing. So thanks.
Thank you. And maybe I'll use my prerogative as chair to just add that I agree with that perspective strongly. I think that it really does, it would be, I think, more challenging to focus on plastics first than to not focus on plastics, you know, and focus on all materials. So just to highlight that. Okay, Anya, and then Kristen.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan. Sorry. Thanks, Dylan. I wanted to highlight two pieces that have come up on the plastics first discussion. I totally agree that we are here having this conversation today because of plastics, and like that was the initial push between 582, kind of what this focus was meant to be on. I also see this as a wonderful opportunity to kind of suggest sweeping changes for all of our labeling, right? Because 582 is material inclusive and expansive. We really have been given this opportunity to level the playing field and make sure that we're addressing all of that labeling equally, which obviously includes plastics, and then, you know, this emphasis on RIC and other things like that. So just wanted to offer that as feedback, though I do recognize how much plastics have contributed to this, of course. And the other piece was just kind of echoing back a while ago to the QR code versus Holy Grail conversation. I think one thing, part of our charge was to look at, you know, transparency and accountability to the public. And I think the Holy Grail, in that it is not visible, doesn't help convey that to the public, whether or not it is recyclable or not. So you're really putting the onus, you know, even if it's helping MRFs, because you have this scannable tech, you know, if we can get the MRFs, the technology needed, you're still putting the onus on the MRFs rather than on consumers. Not saying we should put the onus on consumers, but you're not giving consumers that empowerment to understand what their product is, if they're wanting to make a decision based on recyclability or anything like that. And then, you know, you're still getting contaminants in the stream that just easier to sort out potentially on the back end. So that is why I would vote for something more like a QR code, where if consumers did want to gather more information for themselves, they could.
or perhaps amending that to say if, I'll go back to the full legislation, smart labeling technology underlined by additional, text or something along those lines. That could be valuable. Kristen, you're next. Dan, do you mean to have your hand still raised? Because I'll call on you after Kristen if that's the case. Oh no, okay, go ahead, Kristen.
So thank you. So with Anya's point, I think that's a good one on QR codes and consumer facing. I mean, we are here about stopping the confusion to consumers. So if it needs to be consumer facing to understand that. The other pieces that might be related to information to others is fine as well, but the QR code needs to speak to consumers, and also not just the QR code. I mean, I think we can't just say, oh, we're only going to do the QR code. We need to do other things as well as that moves forward over time. So then just back to the other pieces that are in this conversation, this Senate Bill 582 is the Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act. And that's in its title, that's what it's about. And Dan's comments also about, how do we tell what is plastic and what is not, what's plastic coated, what isn't, all those different things. Honestly, I don't believe those materials are going to show up in the USCL to start either, because things like cartons, things that are wax, things that don't fit shouldn't be in there in the first place. I'm not suggesting when I say we talk about plastics first that we don't talk about other things as well. I'm suggesting you view it more like the bottle bill, which was originally certain items and over time has expanded to include additional things. So when Dan talks about the bottle bill being regional, it is now, and it wasn't when it started, right? So the industry was able to figure out how to label something for a specific state back in 1971 when the bottle bill passed in Oregon. It's possible to do these things, and I'm hearing a lot about cost and complexity. There's a lot of cost and complexity involved in the back end of this conversation as well, of trying to explain to consumers what fits in a recycling cart or what goes in a depot based on inappropriate, misleading labeling on those packages. And it's not an issue for our traditional materials. It's not an issue for paper, cardboard, tin, aluminum. Those are not the issues that we are talking about and what have brought us here. We are talking about plastic-based issues, even if they are included in another product that maybe we're not talking about directly here, like a carton or something like that. So it's not, don't discuss it at all. It's, we've got a short amount of time. Let's focus on the big stuff, which in this case is the plastics materials that are contaminating our products. And then over time, we can modify this to speak to more. I also hear about the practicality piece. And that, that one kind of gets to me too. If we wanted to just talk about practical, we'd go ahead and throw glass in the commingled cart, because that's a lot easier than sending a second truck around to pick up glass separately. Practical isn't always the best choice for us, and we have dealt with the complexity and the cost. Our ratepayers have done that to provide cleaner materials to the markets. We're here to talk about misleading labeling on packaging that causes contamination, and that packaging is plastic. And one of the things I don't see noted in here that did get, 5 in support was number 15, requiring the packaging industry to propose and advocate for federal legislation to remove chasing arrow laws in 36 states. When you want to talk about practicality and the difficulty of having it different because Oregon's different, that's because of what happened in the past. And I just want to make it really clear. I am not in any way trying to impugn anybody in this conversation about past actions of other groups, but I am saying that that did happen. We are all aware of it. And the question and the choice is, how are we going to correct that? And shouldn't those that had the causation for it beginning be the ones to step up and say, you're right, we made a mistake on this, and we're going to step up and show you how to fix it, because we're actually partners in this process. We really want to do what we say we want to do, which is tell the consumers how to recycle what they can and not to put things in a recycling cart that don't fit. So this goes back to my comment on, we're talking about proposals that you guys put together quickly, and I appreciate it, but have skipped a lot of the other conversation that we spent time doing these surveys about. So I think if we would spend more time on those conversations, maybe we could craft proposals together that would make more sense than you guys trying to do that work as a chair and a vice chair without more input from this group. So thank you.
Kristen, I'm just going to speak directly to you. This meeting is gathering the information, and we are honing these proposals with you right now. And you taking the time to chastise us that we are not doing the thing that we are literally actively doing, it is not productive use of our time. So
No,
I'll just say that we are taking the time to be able to gather that information from you right now. You have the opportunity to do this right now. We are not finalizing anything. And I appreciate the feedback, but letting us have that conversation right now that we're having and telling me that we're not having the conversation is not beneficial to this process.
Okay, I'm not trying to chastise you, Dylan. I'm disagreeing with the fact that we're not having the conversation in an order that maybe it just makes sense to me that you talk about the concepts and then you build the proposals. If others feel comfortable with proposals and then having to dig back through the material to see what's not here and what isn't, I'm not trying to pick on you about it. I'm just trying to explain to you that, you know, I'm having to thumb through stuff and say, well, didn't we talk about this in another piece?
Kristen, this is a fast moving process that we are doing together. And we are doing this together. We are not saying that when you're done with this meeting that we no longer are taking comments. We are taking that comment right now from you on the record.
I'm not trying to make you defensive. I'm just trying to explain the position. So thank you.
So
I would also
I
would just add specifically on some of these pieces, we did consult between both of us with our expertise and also DEQ. And like one of the issues with, you know, having producers kind of push for federal rules, that is absolutely what is needed, right? You are totally hit the nail on the head. That is how we address this issue. We don't have the authority to get producers to do that, right? We can't even, like, the PRO is going to be an NGO, and so
501c3.
It has lobbying restrictions. Oregon, you know, a legislature, we can tell them to pass a sense of Congress or, you know, something like that, or like put it out there, but we don't have, you know, we just didn't feel like that had the real some of the teeth that, you know, could actually have standing as some of these other recommendations. So that's why we chose not to focus on it. Absolutely can put it back in if we think about what that would look like and how we could implement something like that. But there were some pieces like that were like, man, we just don't know how we would accomplish that.
Sure, and not understanding how we could do it or having more of a conversation about it, I think is important. I mean, this law is not a constitutional law, right? We can propose and make changes and make suggestions to the legislature about what we think is important and viable and should be included. And that is a piece of why we are here, because we are writing a report that the legislature will consider. So I think there are more ways to look at it. I just think we should be thinking outside the box on some of those things, and also internally about, you know, why we're here in the first place and what can we do to correct that. Thank you.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. I just want to say that we don't need a stick inserted into legislation to get industry to move to try to get something done at the federal level. We're Americans doing that. There are other groups doing that. And we're committed, and everyone based on the survey results agrees that's a good path forward. And I just want to say publicly, we're working on that. Others are working on that. Something put into legislation, which, as I said during the last task force meeting, doesn't really cognitively, intuitively makes sense to me. We don't need it. I'll just say we don't need it. We're doing it already. We're trying to get that done.
I'd be curious to see what that means, Dan, and what the efforts are and the groups that are working on that and how that works, because while you say that, I appreciate that. It would be nice to see what the effort is and what the language is going to look like, because of course that's important too. I mean, I would suggest it starts with removing the chasing arrows in every state that currently has it. That's where we begin, because that's the conversation we continue to have here, because it exists in 36 other states. It's not practical, it's too expensive, it's too complex for the packagers to change the packaging. So until we see that work, I get that you don't like a stick, but you know, let's toss out a carrot. Let's do something different so that we can actually see some movement on this, because we've heard a lot of words over a number of years. It'd be nice to see what's actually happening to make the change. So thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And take my word for it. We're working on it. You can ask all my members. You can, you know, I can, you know, if you were a member of mine, you'd know we're meeting regularly with folks on the Hill. So we're doing it. And my word is good on that, you know, and I understand at some point you're going to want to see an others are going to want to see that language as well. And when we're ready to present that, which is, you know, we're working on that, it's not a big secret. It'll be out there for people to look at. But the point today is we're working on it, and that is my word on behalf of Ameripen.
And I would just like to highlight that is potentially some additional research that we can do as a task force to be able to compile that information as we're considering it. Again, we were highlighting what we heard back from you all as task force members as a survey of where we saw the most support, and it is not where we saw the most support. So I would like to continue on with these dialogue and call on Jenny to see where she's coming from, as she'd like to add to the conversation.
Yeah, just a couple sort of totally different thoughts about the activity at the federal level. Let's not undermine some of the work that is being done at the federal level by some amazing nonprofits right now. There is a lot of advocacy on the Plastic Pollution Act that is being done by amazing organizations like the Surfrider Foundation that are really trying to tackle recycling at its, like, you know, as part of the equation, but also just plastic production in general. And I would be disappointed to see Oregon go a little rogue and go off on its own and not work together with some of the work that's already being done on this. And there is a ton of work being done on it by a lot of environmental and conservation organizations. We could definitely look into what that work is, but like, it's being done and we should be a part of it, but let's not be another voice that's not working in conjunction with the voices that are already doing this, that have been meeting with state legislatures. Surfrider just had an advocacy day where they met with Senators Merkley and Wyden. So like, we can definitely include some of that into the conversation if we're worried that that's not being done. And as far as the challenges, like, I don't like, it's a little unfair to say that the producers are trying to deceive the customer. I don't think that anybody wants to be deceitful. And I think that a lot of the problems that are happening in Oregon are not Oregon specific. I work in about 8 different states right now, and I go to MRFs and I go to compost facilities, and the problems are all the same in all of these states when it comes to sorting, when it comes to consumers being confused about what goes where, confusing labeling. It happens all across the country. It happens in my own house. I can't get my own partner to stop putting lids in the recycling, no matter how many times I tell him, and he lives with me. It is everywhere. And that is why I think we support working with CalRecycle and working with Washington and not pretending that Oregon has issues states, because it's the same in the other states, and you go to all of them. I went to a compost facility in Nevada last week that was covered in plastic and covered in little stickers from produce. The plastic pollution problem is everywhere. And so we need to work with the states that are around us to make sure waste goes between states too. So we need to be a part of a regional solution, I think. And I think that's why we're asking for Oregon to work with our surrounding states, with our neighbors, to understand that if you live in Hood River, your green scraps are going to Dallasport, right? Like, things move around. And so we need to recognize the part that we play in a regional system and not kind of close our doors and decide to focus on just Oregon and not how Oregon is part of a bigger system.
Thank you for that, Jenny. I have a quick follow-up question on that, which is on the Surfrider piece. Was that, are you suggesting federal legislation around labeling that they're leading, or are you just meaning in plastics in general? Because I just want to make sure we're sticking to the charge of this meeting, which is on labeling, obviously.
It sounds like Anya has.
It seemed like you were discussing the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, and there are labeling pieces to that.
Right,
and would be happy to write up feedback or disseminate information if the task force members are interested, as I was highly involved in that. So happy to share that out if members of this task force are interested in what's in that particular bill.
It sounds like that's what Jenny was highlighting, and that would be we would be foolish not to take advantage of your presence on this task force to share that information as part of our research. Maya, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually that kind of gets ahead of my question, which is really, or not question, comment, which I was going to suggest, since we're having this additional meeting to get some more information, that we include in that meeting some a little bit of like detailed and a dive into some of the federal legislation that is being formed, so that we can incorporate that, that knowledge. And if we're going to do this like regional or wanting to align with other pieces, I think it's good if we have a little bit of a deeper understanding of what that currently looks like. That's all.
Thank you, Maya. Kristen?
I just want to emphasize one more time, I am not suggesting anyone in this group or anyone that they work for is intentionally deceitful in the process of the labeling. But that being said, the reason we are here is because 36 other states are required to have the chasing arrows around their RIC code, which means to people it is confusing and misleading. Whether the intention was deceitful then, that's a whole nother conversation. But right now, that is where we are, and that is why we start in a hole when we try and educate consumers about what is truly recyclable in this state and where they should put it for recycling. So in Jenny's point where she said everywhere she goes, she sees the same problems. If the labeling didn't continue to say recyclable, that might take care of a portion of this problem, since we know the research shows people look at the labels before they decide where to put something when they are making its end of life choice. That is the point I'm trying to make, that we are in this position because of other states and an effort to make sure that the recycling symbol circled the RIC code. And that's what we'd like to correct, so that we can continue to educate consumers about what is actually recyclable in the state of Oregon. And honestly, I don't think going rogue is how I would call what we're doing here. What we're trying to do here is find a solution that works in Oregon. And if that solution can also be carried forward to the West Coast, how brilliant and fabulous would that be to work together to make that happen? And the same effort to turn our scope and look to Congress to say, we're trying to solve a problem. It'd be really great if you could help us do that. So that's what I'm looking for, is some kind of a practical conversation here about what we can do to make that happen. Thanks.
Kristen, I as a piece of comment, I hear you both suggesting and pushing back against practicality as a metric for action. And I would suggest that we are, if these proposals, any of these proposals would really be pushing this whole conversation forward. Even the status quo plus, would be getting towards that. I think that the focus you have on plastics only, or to have an Oregon only labeling, I think that's where we are pushing back on you're hearing some pushback on the practicality of implementation of this, because the idea is that we do want to deliver this quickly and fast. And I certainly know that plastics are a focus of maybe what does confuse folks, but the research that I've read say people are confused about other packaging as well, and having that recyclability determination and labeling be consistent for all packaging, I think would benefit the entire system, and something that we would hopefully benefit your members as well. Three of which are on this meeting. So
absolutely. And over time, I think all of those things can be considered in a stepped-in process that doesn't require us to try and get that done by June 1st. I think we just need to remember the reasons that we're here, and what the law said, and why we're in the room on
we are
this.
here, and it actually doesn't specifically call out plastics in why we're here in the charge. And again, I think that we are here dedicated to try to find support, and I think that we can make recommendations that don't necessarily call that out, that still get us to what you're hoping to get to, and again would support you and your members
and the entire industry that supports then the markets and the efforts to have recycled content and everything else.
Absolutely.
Not just about I'm here because of my membership, but we're all here as a part of trying to clean up the system,
the recycling system,
that we deliver materials to markets that need them.
We need the environmental benefits that come from that, from plastics, from glass, from metals, from paper all across the line. Terrific. Tom, go ahead.
Just a couple of things. I think, thinking about our timeline and the speed in which we need to deliver a recommendation to the legislature. I think what's within our scope of control and authority, and when I'm thinking I'm thinking even the state of Oregon, because we're talking about the legislature telling Tennessee what to label their materials, or telling producers how to lobby, I don't think is legally feasible. So I don't even know if it's worth spinning our wheels around on it. What we can talk about is what we want to do in Oregon, and what we want on Oregon packaging. And I see there's, you know, a want for Oregon specific labels. So I think that understanding those questions and talking about what does practical mean and what does cost more mean are really good questions that we could unpack versus kind of trying to think about things that seem really out of scope to me. So I think we should focus in on those questions and unpack what practicality is, unpack what it could cost more is, unpack those really specific questions about Oregon, and not really focus on what the other states are doing or what's not really within our scope of authority or control. And when I say our, again, I think the legislature.
Thank you, Tom. Nicole, you want to chime in?
Yes, I'm going to kind of continue on Thomas's thoughts that he was just talking about. And when we're thinking about Oregon and labeling, I want to make sure that we also think about the resources out there and some of the labeling standards that are already out there, including SPC's How to Recycle label, including APR's design guidelines. I know that California is looking at adapting the APR design guidelines, and that links with the How to Recycle label. So when we talk about QR codes and what we want to do in Oregon, there's people that have been doing this for years, and the producers are used to it. Consumers have gotten used to some of that labeling, and maybe what is working there and what is not working there when we're thinking about Oregon.
Yeah, and I mean, the APR design guides are codified in 343. They are a determination or requirement for plastics products to adhere to design guidance. Yeah, so that's a well put, Nicole. Jenny, go ahead. And then I have a proposal.
Mine was just about the materials and whether we're just focusing on plastic or other types of packaging, and that I would advocate for us to look at packaging in general, simply because I think a lot of people don't always know what plastic is. There's a lot of packaging out there that looks like paper, but actually, like if you take frozen food box, for example, it has plastic in it. And so I think that to us, it seems very clear because we're all kind of in it. We know what packaging is made out of. But I think that like the average person at home often doesn't really have any idea what that package is made out of. And so that's why I would support us really focusing on packaging in general and not just narrowing it down to plastic.
Agreed. Okay, William, then Dave, then Tom.
Thank you. If we're talking about, and I think we're talking about putting recyclable or figuring out how to make it easy to understand what goes in the commingled cart, then there isn't that much, there aren't that many types of plastic that go in there, right? So,
well, William, this would be a future state, so we don't know what's on the universal Oregon statewide list. So I apologize for interrupting, but I do.
No, that's fine. I get that. I don't think, and I'm certainly not going to advocate for a whole lot of stuff on that list. Yes, a future state. And I hope that over time that list increases by, a whole lot. There's a lot of confusion out there. I was on an Alaska Airlines flight to Florida a few weeks ago, and they're not serving water out of plastic bottles anymore on that airline. They're serving it out of something called boxed water is better, and it's a milk jug, carton type thing, and it says all over it, this is the best way to do it. If you look at their website, this is the best way to do it. Oh, never mind, we have plastic and some I think some kind of metal in our packaging, but it's totally recyclable. Everything's great. Look the other way. This is awesome. So I'm going to be pushing hard against that type of stuff. But my point is that right now, not much, when you can look at all products out there, goes in the cart, and it's not going to go in. Even in 10 years, we're not going to get to 10 or 20% of all the material out there. There's 1,000 different types of plastic, and we only want 2 or 3 in the cart, right? I just wanted to put that out there. It's not, if we're talking about just what's going in the cart as being obviously recyclable, I mean, I would like to put on half of every package, you know, and make it extremely, this one goes in your cart. Yay, good job. So I don't know. I just think we're going a little bit awry if we're talking about every product under the sun and trying to figure out whether that's recyclable or not. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Dave?
Yeah, I just wanted to tack on to Jenny's point a little bit. From the Metro survey that was done, I believe one of the interesting facts was that not only are people confused, but they have a high degree of confidence in their wrong answers. And so it's not just a matter of getting the facts out there. We're having to compete against these label claims and marketing things that, you know, and it's not on, we can't say anybody's doing anything on purpose. It's like, but people are making an intentional decision to put recycling claims on their products with the hope that it makes their product selected on the shelf compared to the competition. And, you know, we see that with compostables as well. I mean, people will spend significantly more money to buy cups and plates they think are compostable and then they talk to the composters and they say, we're not composting that stuff. You've confused the customer, and they've spent more on plates and cups than if they had just bought designed for disposal items in the first place. So I think there's a lot to be done on customer education and generator education. And I think a good proposal, if we're doing our work, would address those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I do want to highlight that on that generator communication, that is embedded in 582, and that there will be it's a requirement for Oregon communities to provide from that menu of options to have that direct resident communication around what's accepted and what's not. So that is a, we can check that off our list to start us out, Dave. But great comment. Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. I was just going to suggest that this question about plastic or everything keeps coming up, and I know we didn't have the benefit of the conversation during the survey taking, but I think now that we've talked about it for close to an hour, it's maybe something that could be revisited again with kind of a vote or a poll or something along those lines. Obviously, it doesn't need to be binding, but it's just something that I think might be worth considering.
Sure. Why don't we do I'll look to the vice chair. Do you support doing a quick live vote here? Great. So let's do a quick live vote of again, this is just on plastics only, or on labeling just on plastics only, or labeling for all packaging materials, which is, as a reminder, all packaging materials are under scope of 582.
Just to jump in here, I'm sure Kristen could also jump in as well, but just focusing on packaged plastics first, I think, is the actual language there. So having our recommendation focus on plastics first would be the language we are voting on at the moment.
So yes, focus on plastics first. No, do not focus on plastics first. Will be the.
Are we giving this to Alex? Is that what we're doing?
Giving it to Alex? Yes.
Okay.
And we'll have him compile that. I'll give you a moment to put it in the chat, send it to Alex, he'll count it up, and then we'll dig in. I wanted to go back to Tom. We had a series of comments, but now that nobody's hand is raised and we're taking that, I wanted to, maybe we could unpack a bit of the practicality and cost components. I think cost is something that we could do some quick and dirty research. I've done a little bit of research on my own, reaching out to converters of what it would cost to change RIC codes. And unfortunately, it's a really broad spectrum of depending on what the changes would be. in terms of changing out entirely, getting rid of the triangle, or getting rid of the everything altogether, which, to be very clear, is strongly not supported by the Association of Plastic Recyclers. I feel like I should comment as I see Nicole's eyes widen on the screen. There is a cost to that. And I could share that bit of information out. We could share additional costs. I don't know exactly how we would be able to get like maybe bottle bill only data on materials that are not currently, maybe extra imported bottles. I'm thinking about that as a sticker, that is challenging to comply. We could talk about that. But Tom, did you have a concept in making those suggestions on how to unpack practicality? If not, we can, I think, have a conversation about that. If not.
Not necessarily, Dylan. I just think it's, my assumption, and I will say that it's just my assumption, is that it's would be challenging, but I appreciate Kristen pushing back on that and saying, but why? They can do it with the bottle bill. And I think that's a question we deserve to answer or know the answer to. And just, saying, yeah, it's a new printer, or it's a machine and a mold. I mean, it's a one-time change. Is that how it works? My guess is that the bigger challenge is probably in the distribution network versus it is in the facility that stamps something with a label on it. But I don't understand. I don't know how distribution works for microwave food boxes from Annie's Organics or whatever it is. I mean, just pick a product and try to understand, how does that get to market? And is it possible for there to be an Oregon specific market, or is there a way to have multiple states labels on a same material like the bottle bill model, I guess? So that's kind of where my mind is going, but
that's fair. And I think we can address that. I think in part that there are very few materials produced just for Oregon only, and that most are produced for a market, and there are requirements in those other markets, to the point that Kristen had brought up earlier. So practicality of producing something specifically, I guess what I would argue is that the bottle mill materials are a discrete packaging type, which are as part of that, and 582, whether it's just plastics, and I believe Alex is going to give us that vote total in a moment, or all materials, the level of complexity goes up exponentially to then just beverage containers would be my suggestion there. But I think some supply chain examples, perhaps for our research compilation meeting, would be valuable. I'm going to go to Alex first because he has the vote, and then we'll go to Kristen and Dan.
Thanks, Dylan. It looks like there were 7 no's to focus on plastic only and focus on all materials, and 5 yeses to focus only on plastic. Therefore, the vote says focus on all materials.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Alex. Kristen, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say to Tom's point, and also from the survey, that in all of those things, making changes in the molds or the process that would have to be done, there's a time component built into that would not require that to be done immediately. It would be done over time, which could allay the concerns about cost and other factors as well. So I think we're all supportive of recognizing that it could take time to get these things done. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Kristen. Dan?
Yeah, thank you. I echo what Kristen said, and I think it would be helpful for the research, if we do the one-off call or whatever, to have a little bit better understanding of the time on that, and cost, which is a factor, of course, but if it can be spread out over time, I think that's a value. I'm also curious, I'll tell you from American's perspective, we've had a little discussion about RIC codes, and I've heard mixed messages from members, some saying they're not needed at all, others saying, oh, they're absolutely needed, and here's why. So as we talk about maybe some research and education in another session, is to hear a little bit more about the RIC codes themselves, if that makes sense, Dylan. So.
That does make sense.
Thank you.
I'm writing the list down now of what we can compile for that. And I think that's super valuable. So I have, labeling technology, cost, practicality, and then RIC are what I'm seeing as necessary to help make these decisions. Great. And Dan, from now on, I'm not going to ask you if you mean to keep your hand raised. I'm just going to assume after you talk that your hand is down, and you can pop it back up if you don't. I know it's hard. It's on a different screen for me. Okay. So I'd love to see if there's further commentary. This has been good, robust conversation, and if there isn't further commentary, I was going to make some proposals of what we could do for our next steps, other than what has been robustly commented on, which is the need for to have a proposal. Sorry, to have research presented to the task force writ large. Hearing none, we have taken robust notes of this dialogue, and what we were going to suggest is to take a hack at the individual feedback we got on these various pieces, on the recommendations, and that we would share that back out quickly, not immediately before this meeting, although we appreciate your grace in receiving this before this meeting, and ask for feedback from those proposals in writing that we could then dig into the next meeting. And that was our vision of giving proposals, straw person proposals, not final proposals, but straw person proposals, is that we would beat them all up. And I would argue that they are a fair amount. They've gotten whacked a few different times, and we've maybe taken some pieces off. That we would, or maybe even added some pieces. I heard some recommendations for some honing of some of these pieces as well, that we would share back out with the group and receive feedback, and then that would help further, finalize the direction that we think we're going as a group. We could pair that with a poll, but I feel like we're getting some shape to this as we're driving this forward. If I'm taking the tenor of the majority of the conversation, the comments that we've received. Are there any, Anya, do you want to jump in, or are there any other comments on that proposal moving forward?
Appreciate that, Dylan. I think that sounds spot on to me. I would agree that Dylan and I can put our heads together with all the wonderful feedback we've heard, share back out in a written form in a timely fashion with you all, receive written feedback prior to our next meeting. And then if a poll is needed, or we're still at, kind of sticking points on bits and pieces, that might be a better time to kind of do that vote taking, or survey would be after that. But would love to hear our fellow task force members' comments on that as well.
Yes, we'd love to hear. Again, we shared a roadmap last time. This is us adhering to this roadmap. We've added a quick pit stop on the way to the next meeting for that roadmap, but would love feedback. Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, do we, just off the top of your head, Dylan, we don't have to totally look into it, do we know how many more full meetings we have scheduled before we have to vote on a proposal?
Yep. So here, let me share. I can share the next steps. So these are the next meetings that we're having. So we have 4 more meetings. The next, we had plans on having a conversation about accessibility, and to share that draft proposal again after honing. The next would be editing language for that proposal. The meeting following would be working on and finalizing that report. And then we've held that meeting we have held 2 hours. Our hope would be that, and you'll see that this is just a week apart instead of the traditional 2 weeks apart. Our hope would be that this would be a short meeting, but given where we are, it will likely require those full 2 hours to finalize the report. And then we have to turn it in on the 1st.
Yikes.
Yes. So that is why we did a little extra work in advance to try to get this out, and we'll do so again. So I just want to highlight again, maybe showing this before all of you, we'll be tucking in a meeting before that April 20th meeting for the research to be able to get to that proposal. We'll be talking about accessibility and drafting that. So our thought would be that Anya and I, with DEQ's help, would be taking the commentary from this meeting, sharing out Hone's proposals in the form of slides, I think is probably the most likely way we would do it. Receive written feedback from you all, and then if necessary, do another round of a poll, depending on the feedback. And again, would love feedback on that concept. If there's anyone opposed to that next steps, I would ask you to raise your hands and talk, or forever hold your peace. Or any, and honestly, not just opposed, but also if there are any grace notes or underlining that you would like to do, or suggestions to add to that. You're right, Kristen. I was continuing to talk to get you to raise your hand, so I'm grateful to see it. Go ahead, Kristen.
Well, I've commented at least to the chairs and staff about transparency on just in general, but on this issue as well. You know, we all were appointed to this task force by the governor. I think if we were sitting in the room, it would be very obvious how we were voting and what we were doing. I don't think it should be any different in a Zoom process for benefit of our other task force members, as well as for the large group of people that are interested in this from the public. And I think it's hard to be as transparent as you'd like to be in a Zoom setting. And I think we should work really hard to make sure that people understand where we are on these issues. We were appointed to represent particular statutory goals in this group. And I feel like that's important, that we attribute our comments to the people that make them. As far as the process going forward, I'd like to suggest that it's not just a small group that looks at the drafting of the proposals, but you broaden that to a larger group as it goes forward, so that we can all have a role in writing this. It's hard to, as you can tell, have conversations when you haven't had a lot of time to review stuff. And for those of us that are willing to put in the work, if there's more of an opportunity to participate as it's prepared, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
So in addition, you're suggesting in addition to the meetings that we have on the books for the task force, further meetings to be able to do more drafting together. Is that what you're suggesting? You
know how I love these extra meetings as a general rule, right. But I just feel like timelines, it's too difficult to be presented with something, and I think have a really thoughtful way of reviewing it. I shared with both of you when I first filled out the survey as a kind of a straw survey for my internal group, I answered questions a certain way, and then when I had a broader conversation, I changed my mind on a couple of things because my group explained that to me as like, have you thought about it from this perspective? So I think more input is better, and it will lead to a better result. So for the people that want to and have the time to participate in that, then I would like you to make that an option. Yes, thanks.
Gotcha. Okay, terrific. I will add that to our timeline and work back and highlight opportunities to be able to get together. Thank you for that, Kristen. Oh, and with regards to transparency, what we will do then is the commentary that we are asking for on the straw person proposals that we will adjust and share back out. The expectation is that would be that we would make those attributable to that feedback. We did not make that suggestion in advance of the survey, thus why we are not sharing those individual feedback. But excellent note, Kristen. Thank you so much. Maya, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, actually, I was going to speak to that point, which is to say, I was going to suggest when it was put to the group earlier, that as a way of responding to say who's in favor, or like taking a poll, that we use our raise hand function like we would in a in a public meeting. So that was just a quick suggestion. Thank you.
I like that suggestion, and it means that Alex can count on us. Is there any opposition to that suggestion?
I just clarify that we've gone through this with our advisory committee. The raise hand doesn't show up on a recording. So if we do it, we should probably do real hands so that it shows up in a recording.
Alex has a comment to this. He's raised his hand virtually and physically. Go ahead.
Whatever voting method you all like makes sense. We will put the vote in the meeting summary as well. So folks will be able to find who voted for what there.
Thank you, Alex. Kristen, did you have something to add to that? Or no, you were just testing the...
He just answered my question. Thank you.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, terrific. I appreciate the additional call for transparency, which we will deliver. I believe we've had a fairly transparent system, and I'm excited to be able to make it even more transparent as we move forward. I did not hear any pushback on what that draft proposal was. Rather, there was only a grace note to be added. I want to give another moment to be able to capture more information on that or more feedback around this. And then I wanted to get to the report outline, the proposed report outline, and then we'll dig into public input.
On the issue of transparency, I just wanted to make a note for the record that the chair and I only used the summarized data. So what you got was what we got and what we used. So it's not like we were trying to withhold information. DEQ namely collected the names so we could keep track of who had submitted surveys, what point. But we really did just want to we just wanted to get a sense of the numbers for the group. So was very much our intention. And so we worked with that intention, and moving forward, we've heard this feedback and we'll make sure we are explicit in all of our surveys and comments, what will be, reported back out. So thanks.
Fantastic. All. Thank you, Anya. Oh, Kristen, you have something before we get to the report outline.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest, I don't think anybody has any feelings of any intent to do anything else from the chair, the vice chair, the staff. It's just a question of making sure going forward that we all have the same information that we're looking at, so there aren't any confusions about how the decisions were made. So thank you.
Sorry, Kristen, was that just underlining, or did you have an additional? Okay, got it. Thank you. Terrific. So I wanted to share this really quick. We're going to use a couple of minutes. We only have one person who has asked for public input, so we will switch to that after this. But this is a rough report outline that we're putting forward before you. This would be an efficient report that could grow depending on how those addendums are put forward. But the idea being that we would have our introduction and task force charge, and which a statutorily required executive summary. We would highlight specific recommendations to legislature, specific recommendations to the PRO, and then we would have addendums that would include compilations of confusing labeling research, some of which we've already done, compilations of issues affecting accessibility for diverse audiences, which we'll discuss on the next meeting, compilations of future labeling technology or processes, which we have done some, but we will be doing more with our side meeting next week. And then opportunities outside of recommendations. And this is really meant to sort of capture pieces that are Lego pieces that we did not necessarily pick up and plug into legislature, and perhaps give some opportunity to have some more specific calls to action that would not be part of those recommendations to legislature or the PRO. And then obviously meeting summaries of each of these meetings alongside who attended the meetings. And now additionally, we would have summaries of the communications and votes that we are taking as well. Are there any questions, pushback, commentary on this report outline? This is not your last attempt or last chance to see this. This is a first draft that we are putting out there to be able to get feedback, to just get our thoughts around what would be included in this report, given our aggressive timeline and how little time we have together to be able to deliver this report.
Hey, Dylan, one suggestion or question.
Sure, Sean, and then Maya. Go ahead.
On, I know we have a lot to figure out in the next few meetings on just the labeling requirements. But once that's determined, something in here needs to address the liability then following that. So I know, and it's something I know you heard Kristen and I have a conversation last meeting about when it involves the definition of producer in Senate Bill 582, but you have obviously distributors and retailers down the line. So I think, we have suggestions for that from the retail side of this because it was put in Senate Bill 582. But at some point, I would like to have that put into the into the report outline. I don't know where that fits, but I wanted that just part of the agenda.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think that kind of got, we had initially put the DOJ to be able to answer some of those questions, but we've not been able to secure a DOJ staffer to be able to deliver that. We do have time to have DOJ review of the report to be able to put in there. But I will say that's something we need to revisit, although Alex is coming on screen and so perhaps has commentary to that point.
Yeah, DOJ, we did ask them some questions. They won't be able to provide someone to be staff here at the meeting, but we are working on a write-up to answer some of the questions around current laws within Oregon and how those would work to do some of these, move some of these consumer protection side of things.
And again, I think as long as we track with Senate Bill 582, sections 3 and 4, as we get into the flexibility of the definition of, section 3, the definition of producer, and section 4, some of that flexibility of who's responsible, that addresses the liability. And so, you know, again, I can come up with specific proposals, but I think it's just important to address that because a lot of the work has been done in 582.
I think there's an overwhelming bias of this group to be able to have this be complementary to 582 and around that scope. And Sean, if you're willing to take that on, or perhaps in partnership with Kristen, I would ask, is there any opposition among task force members to have you take a stab at that? Or if somebody wants to throw their hat in the ring to help you out with that? I'll pause and then I'll call on Maya.
I'd be happy to look at it with Sean if you'd like that. Thanks.
Okay, perfect.
Kristen and Sean, they have homework. Thank you so much. Maya, go ahead, and then we're going to go to public comment.
Yeah, my comment actually kind of aligns with Sean's. So I was going to suggest that the outline includes some sort of context or background, that there's a subsection, or maybe it's in the addendums as well, or the more fleshed out background, and then there's just a short blurb about it in the executive summary. But I would suggest having some sort of lead into the contexts of both California and the other kinds of things we've discussed here so far.
That's great. I will say that's why I wrote introduction. I thought that the introduction could kind of state that case and have that, you know, of why this is happening and the direction it took. So that's wise. Okay. So I want to make sure that we have enough time for public input. So I'm going to put the megaphone on the screen here and punt to Alex to be able to get our public comment in.
Before you do that, do you want to talk about the next public input period?
That's going to be following the megaphone.
All right. I believe we just have one, and that is Paloma Sparks.
Thanks. Paloma Sparks for Oregon Business and Industry. We're also the Oregon Retail Council. Just a couple things. I think I'll reserve most of my comments about the actual proposals for the next meeting. But one, I'd just like to tell you that as a member of the public, it's pretty challenging to figure out what each meeting is, the topics are going to be, even to sort of give folks a heads up about what to expect and whether or not it makes sense to sort of tune in and how much engagement they should have. So if we can be a little bit clearer on just agenda items, I think that would be really helpful. Another thing is we've heard a lot about the bottle bill, and I would just say, like, packaging and how that was done when the bottle bill was implemented is so different from how it is done today. It was much more regional, it was much more hands-on, there's less machinery. All of that makes doing something that's an Oregon-specific labeling really challenging. It's a different thing when California has implemented a full labeling law because their market share is just so much bigger than Oregon's is. So I'd ask you to really take that into account as you consider things moving forward. And then Also, I mean, I think that y'all have done that to a certain extent in this meeting today, but I would just like to reiterate, we'd really like for you all to move away from the topic of what positions companies can take in federal lobbying. One, I don't think it probably would pass constitutional muster. And two, it's simply like a precedent that we would adamantly oppose. And I think most producers would also oppose that Oregon sort of dictates how we advocate for our companies on a national scale. So just a couple things that I would like to flag for y'all. Thanks.
Thank you, Paloma. And I think that the internal task force would also like additional detail for topics and agenda items. So that's something that we can take that challenge and meet it for our next meeting topics. Okay, and agendas can be found, but again, I think there's a request for more information on those agendas, but thank you for sharing that link there, Alex. Okay, so we shared an outline for the report, and so we have an additional proposal that we're putting before you all of a public input for that proposal. And again, this is kind of, we'll look at the calendar again in a moment, but the idea is we want to be able to capture public input. This is part of, I believe, Senator Byer's suggestion, at the very least, if not other members of the task force from the previous meeting. We put our heads together and this is what we put forward, that we would ask for written feedback before meeting 6 and 7 or 7, depending on where we get. DEQ will post the proposals online and solicit written public feedback for a set period. Staff will compile the comments and provide them to the next task force before the next meeting. An hour will be added to the start of meeting either 6 or 7. And again, this depends on where 6 or 7 is, because it depends on where we are with the development of the report. It would be optional for task force members, though I would ask task force members to attend if they're able to. DEQ staff would listen to those public comments, and the task force meeting, when it opens, staff would brief the members on what was heard during that comment. So we'd be able to get written feedback as well as oral commentary in a way that fits into the schedule that we've already developed moving forward. Again, noting that it's April 4th and that it's due on June 1. I would love to see if there's any comments or questions about this proposal of receiving public input on the written report. Dave, go ahead.
Thanks, Dylan. I was looking at another screen here for a second, so I may have misunderstood it. But when you say optional for task force members, can you elaborate a little bit on why that is the direction you went?
Well, the idea being that it's optional because we've already put the calendar items on for everyone, and that DEQ staff would listen to the public comments and then report back out. Also, the task force members would receive the written feedback as well. So you would have that in advance of that meeting. So you would have 2 opportunities to get that public feedback. We made it optional purely because of the burden of time that we've already required members to be. I will be at that task, that hour at the beginning of either one of those meetings. If you are able to, that's wonderful, but we did not want to make it mandatory, given again the burden we already have put on you.
The chair and I both committed to joining whatever one that was and making sure we can report back out with DEQ staff as well.
Okay, thank you.
Kristen?
Well, and just another point, I think that would be recorded as well. So it would be available for people to review if they weren't able to attend. Thanks.
Thank you, Kristen. Excellent addition. Other comments or questions on this proposal for public input for the written report? Again, this is in addition to the public comment that we will receive during the time that Paloma just used. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify too, would whatever comes in as written feedback be provided at the verbal comment session? Or
so would the written comment be shared with the public at that point?
Well, I guess I'm just trying to, if you're getting comments coming in and verbal comments on that hour that have already been submitted during a written feedback period, would it save time for that to be available?
Oh, I see. Yeah, we would ask the people who present the written feedback if they don't have additional comments to not share oral feedback as well. That seems to be duplicative, so if we have person X, let's say Paloma writes a long report and then also gives it orally, we would rather not that be the case, because we'll be receiving that information in both ways. So as a task force.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess the other suggestion, if you weren't thinking of it, is to, because I think we had this discussion, we want to create the opportunity for public comment, but it's not required, correct? So if when the written feedback is solicited, just to make sure that the public, knows they have this opportunity, even though it's not required, if that makes sense.
Sure. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks.
Other comments on this? Hearing none, we'll go to our next steps. I already shared this last slide because we had some comment. These are all of these calendar invites should be on your meeting. The hour in advance will be on either 6 or 7. If I were a betting person, I would probably put it on the 7th, just given where we are and how much time we have to dig in on this. So, looking at your calendar on the 16th, I think would be valuable. I also would not plan on this meeting 8 being a short meeting. Again, this is just reflective of how complex this issue is and how hard we're all working and how passionate we all are about it. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and oh, go ahead, Anya.
I was just going to say, look for probably a survey from Alex or someone else at DEQ on time to finding time on calendars for another, information session that would also be recorded and shared back out in case not everyone can attend, and potentially some other questionnaires regarding things to focus on in next week's discussion on accessibility and access.
Sorry, the week after next meeting on accessibility. Yep.
Yes. Time is a flat circle still in COVID. So I'm just gonna keep blurring all these dates together.
Indeed. Well, with that, I want to thank my vice chair, thank task force members, and thank DEQ for your hard work. That was a really incredibly valuable exchange of information and will help guide us in being able to make this decision and deliver this report by June 1. And with that, thank you all so very much. Really appreciate it.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you.